Despite my being a history nerd that loves ancient Roman history, there are a handful of movies that are grossly inaccurate that nevertheless I find very entertaining and enjoyable. In 2007, for example, Ben Kingsley, John Hannah, Colin Firth, Aishwarya Rai in The Last Legion. Based on a book by the same name, which I have not read, The Last Legion is a mess of historical inaccuracies and idiosyncrasies and anachronisms. The basic concept of the film, though, is very good, one that I've contemplated a lot in history, and I wonder if maybe it would behoove me to read the book. Because I feel like if the story were an epic 3-hour-long movie and there was a lot more explanation, maybe some of the problems would smooth over, but not all of them. The basic premise is this: the last Roman emperor, the boy Romulus Augustus, and a small group of Roman loyalists led by Colin Firth, helped by Aishwarya Rai from the Eastern Empire, take the deposed emperor north to Britain when Odoacer and the Goths sack Rome, and Odoacer just dismisses the last emperor, the last several having been puppets. Odoacer just takes over Rome. All of that is relatively historical, although in the real history, as far as we know, the boy Romulus Augustus was killed trying to escape Rome. In this version of the story, they go north to Britannia to find the missing 9th Legion, the Dragon Legion, guarding Hadrian's Wall. Their nation having fallen, they look for this last, in desperation for this last loyal legion to do something. It's not entirely clear whether they really think they can retake the Roman Empire with that legion, or they're just looking to stage a new government location in a new place with the boy emperor. But they make their way to Britain. Part of this is a subplot. It contains a subplot that we are given clues at the beginning. Little brief narrative by Ben Kingsley in character as Ambrosius about the sword made for Julius Caesar, forged in Britain for the great conqueror that only good men would carry. It was passed down to his noble descendant Tiberius, who's described as a man of great dignity and bearing. And there's an attempt to instill some sort of heroism in the line of the Caesars, all the way to Romulus's mother, who is said to bear the bloodline, and then there's just talk about bloodline, and all of this is really historically ridiculous. Julius Caesar was in Britain for like a minute. He came as a conqueror. There's no evidence they ever figured out how to even communicate between them. Nobody made a sword to celebrate him. And Julius Caesar remains a polarizing figure. However you feel about his impact on Western civilization and what he bequeathed us, to just portray him as this heroic good guy and the people he was there to conquer made him a sword, the whole thing is ridiculous. Trying to paint the degenerate tyrant Tiberius and his filthy, sloppy love hovel on the island of Capri as something noble and dignified, and this is all really, really reaching to try to give a backstory to the sword Excalibur, as it turns out, because it bears an inscription, Gaius Julius Caesar, Ensis Caliburnus. I looked at it several times. I had Latin a couple of years. It's no Latin meaning that I can find. If you can find it, even Google Translate couldn't find it, let me know. Essentially to leave us with the premise that at the end the sword is worn down enough that all that appears on it is Excalibur, Excalibur, somehow, some way. It's a very ambitious story that tries to tie the fall of the Roman Empire to the rise of Britain, to Vortigern, and therefore the Arthurian myths, that the boy grows up to be Pendragon, the son of a dragon, the family name of Uther and Arthur. Of course, Ambrosius turns out to be really Merlin, although the real name, I think, in the chronicles would have been Murther. And there's the weirdest, there's no explanation given for why anybody would make Caesar a sword, why it ends up at Capri, why it's important, why it has sometimes magical powers. It split a whole bed in two when the boy used it. No explanation given for what's going on in Britain. There's so much that, why is there a cult of the sword? Why are people trying to find it? There's no explanation given, and it's ridiculous. Of course, me as a nerd, I look at a lot of things too. I have to say, the set pieces are very good, and the costuming. Now, very early in the Roman period, you had a lot of leather armor, and it was leather plate armor in the sense that it would be extra thick in places. Sometimes you'd have metal plates. The most famous Roman armor is the lorica segmentata, the segmented thing that hung down from the shoulder pieces. We see in all of the movies, and they like to use that in movies, in the wrong time periods. This is very late Empire, and they have very primitive looking leather, mixtures of leather armor. But given the financial and social difficulties, the fact that the empire was crumbling and increasingly dependent on deals they made to allow Odoacer and other Goths to hold commissions under the Roman Senate's authority, etc., trying to hold on, the weird hodgepodge of weaponry and uniforms actually seems appropriate. It seems plausible. It seems like it works. It would be better to do what they did than to put them all in fancy, shiny lorica segmentata that harken back to the glory days. It just wouldn't work. They do, if it were being made now, we'd say there's some woke going on, but having the female warrior played by Aishwarya Rai, and there's a little bit of sort of that classic feminism there. She does things that it's not likely she could actually do against men 4 times her size, but it's a movie. We have a good view of the ethnic diversity, as we would call it today, the racial diversity, concepts unknown to the Romans, that Batiatus, one of the elite Roman guards, is a large African man and a devoted soldier who's with them all the way to Britain. But in Rome, there was cultural imperialism. How loyally you served the empire, how well you learned your Latin, how well you behaved like a Roman, those were the things that determined your identity. So as much as they were rigid imperialists, there were a lot of people of various, you ended up with emperors that were from Spain and from other places in the provinces. I don't think anybody would have thought anything of Batiatus being from North Africa, just happens to be black from North Africa, being a loyal Roman in the army as the way to earn your citizenship in your place if you come from the provinces. Really, it's done really well, in my opinion. Seeing these elite troops do things like there's the Batman grappling hook fired from a crossbow, that was really cool. Honestly, we know the Romans carried out special attacks, things we would call now commando raids. They had their own sort of special forces within the legions. There were men. They would handpick a squad of 8, for example, that were really good at certain things to do these behind the enemy line attacks. We've never seen any Roman James Bond. We've never seen any ancient Roman special ops. But I felt like that's what we were seeing in this movie, and I thought it was legitimately well done. The characters are all really good, and I can't emphasize this enough. The actors all do a good job. There's no bad acting. As ridiculous as the premise is, as completely anachronistic as some of the dialogue about the sword and the stone and Britain, and you're like, how does this even add up? Like, as the meme says, what the hell is even that? But they all deliver it with great sincerity. And all of the Roman soldiers, they really convey this sort of warrior camaraderie where they can be in the midst of battle and make a joke, where they risk all. They have these great dramatic moments about they'll do anything to stand up still for the honor of their country, which is essentially gone. It's really, there's so many amazing stuff. The retired legion, when they find it in Britain, has abandoned by the government, has just taken to living like Celts. And there's a great deal of artistic, dramatic satisfaction when the Legion reassembles to defeat the bad guys at the end, you find yourself cheering for the Romans. Now, there's a million things that are absolutely anachronistic in the movie. I can't possibly list them all. I mentioned some of the treatment of Julius Caesar, the treatment of his bloodline, the character of Tiberius. The Eastern Empire is part of the story, but it's never called the Eastern Roman Empire. We get Arabian figures. Alexander Siddig plays the ambassador from the East. Aishwarya Rai is from there, though she says she's from India, which she is in real life, which was not part of the Eastern Roman Empire. They dress Persian, not Roman, not Greco-Roman, not even Greco-Roman, pre-Turkic of Asia Minor. I mean, nothing about that adds up or makes sense. It's just kind of silly. With their arrival in Britannia, on the island of Britain, the great castles in the distance appear medieval, and there's this group. Anyway. But nevertheless, I find myself watching this movie pretty frequently. When it came out and I had the DVD, showing my age again, I watched that movie so many times. I watched it with all of my friends. I kept putting that movie on because it is such a neat story. Now, one of the neatest things about it, and the thing that I love the most, well, the execution of it is very, very satisfying. The actors do a great job and it comes together well, despite being a weird story. But as a history nerd, I've always thought there's clearly a connection with the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of Britain, with the relationship, even in mythos, of Uther, his father, Constant, being a Christian king of the Anglians or of Britain, depending on how the Romans label it. The idea that Uther is away when Constant dies, but it's a time period when the Romans were fighting in Gaul against a resurgent Gothic growing empire and issues there. There's a lot of things that connect the fall of Rome and the rise of Britain. The Lost Legion being the Dragon Legion, which no doubt stayed behind, intermarried, and its basic Roman ideas of civilization, law, and order with Christianity, which is the religion by the fall of Rome, which is also not really shown in this movie. All of that sort of blends together as to why the Arthurian legend occurs, whatever the real history of that is, how that helped shape modern Britain, the importation of Roman civilization and laws. And I have no doubt that there's a great deal of truth to it. Even the way that Romans made swords, leaving them to cool, using rocks and leaving them in the water to cool, and then the myth of a lady in a lake and a sword from a stone, and all of these sorts of interesting connections cross over. And I think that's what this narrative in the movie The Last Legion is trying to get at. But at the same time, it gives us way too much. It tries to tie in all of the legend of the sword and tie it into the Caesars and their bloodline and the last emperor, and so much of it ends up being absolutely nonsensical that it undoes itself. That being said, that Clive Owen, Keira Knightley, Arthur movie that tried to make the connection was much worse. I would take the Last Legion version of it over that any day. The weird, bizarre Sarmatian knights with their medieval-looking armor, the whole weird anti-Christian message of that Christians locking people in basements till they die because they won't be serfs, like the bishop and like all of this is various things that people had to gripe about Christianity, separated by a millennium and a half, condensed together into a movie allegedly about Arthur. It was the worst piece of trash I've ever seen related to the Arthurian legends. And I've seen some bad movies about that in my day. So The Last Legion is a very satisfying movie, an entertaining movie. Everybody plays it well. And if you're like me and you're passionate for ancient Rome, the patriotism of those Romans, especially at the end, this great moment where they do get it right with the incense burning and the drums play and the Legion forms up into the testudo at command. And boy, that really comes across well. And the heroic charge into battle and they save the day. And that it's very entertaining movie. I love watching it. Very entertaining, but just the historical anachronisms are... So it is. It's like the worst movie that I love, that I look at, and I'm like, oh God, did you guys really? And yet it's so much fun to watch. The Last Legion. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It is free right now. IMDb TV has it free with commercials because I just rewatched it last night.